Chapter 5 Fangs and Notes. A dull thud resounded as Mirette's arrow pierced the target she had drawn on the tree 60 feet ahead of her. She knocked another arrow and drew back her bow, images of past carnage still playing over and over in her mind. They were growing more common. How could they not, having just heard that she may have failed to eliminate her old enemy? She held her right hand steady by her cheek and closed her eyes. She could smell the death and decay as vividly as she had that day. She could see her slain father as clear as the trees around her. She breathed in deep and then released her breath. She repeated this again and again, counting. 1 in, 2 out, 3 in, 4 out. She thought to herself, I cannot be there now. I can smell the wet forest. I can feel the cool autumn air. These were not there when I was a little girl. I can feel the weight of the drawstring on my arm. I could not use a bow then. I am here. I am now. I am powerful. She opened her eyes and released the string. The arrow shot through the trees and hit the target just left of her previous shot. The sun was nearly gone, and soon she would no longer have the light of day to practice. The thought of attempting sleep gnawed at her stomach. It had been 3 long days and nights since the company had parted ways, and she had slept but little, and then not restfully. She felt bitter resentment towards the tireless magi with whom she traveled. She hung her bow across her back and walked to her target. She pulled her arrows free, inspected them for damage, and placed them back into her quiver. She glanced toward the fire her traveling companions had made, and then drew her sword. This she could practice with low light. She moved her blade through the air, fighting an imaginary foe. Mirette soon lost herself in the rhythmic swinging of her blade, the fallen leaves and branches crunching beneath her feet as she moved them constantly. As she swung her blade, she jumped suddenly at the sound of branches breaking too far from her feet to be caused by her. She whirred around, nearly catching Lorinar with the tip of her blade. Breathing hard, she took a step back and sheathed her sword. You shouldn't sneak up on me like that, Mirette said with a biting tone. She felt a seething anger building up in her. She almost wished she had hurt Lorinar. I apologize, Lorinar replied softly as she bowed. I called your name, but you must not have heard me. The sun has gone down, and we have prepared some food to eat. I came only to summon you back to the fire with us. Mirette felt heat rise to her cheeks, her frustration building, though now directed toward herself. Apology accepted, she mumbled, as she began to walk toward their camp. Wait a moment, Lorinar called out, stopping Mirette in her tracks. I wish to speak with you. Mirette worried about what she might have to say. I have served for a long time with the Hand of Fire, the Magi continued. Though I have little prowess with bow or blade, I serve them mostly as a healer of wounds and a protector in battle. I have studied long and hard to understand the art of mending and helping. In doing so, I have met many warriors, passionate people who can do amazing things. Often these men and women have something in common. Many have suffered great loss that has served to spur them into action when many would stand by. Mirette was startled at the intuition Lorinar was displaying. She stood dumbfounded as the healer looked into her eyes with a look of compassion and understanding. It is for this reason that it would not surprise me to learn that you had experienced a similarly traumatic moment in your life that inspires you to do amazing things. I have also noticed that you have not been sleeping. You carry yourself with a heavy sadness that you are not aware is so clear to others. I want to help you, she said, as she reached out her hand to place on Mirette's shoulder. Mirette dodged the hand and turned away from her. Tension built inside of her. Her mind raced to find a way to get out of this conversation. She feared the things that were brewing inside of her would lead her teammates to distrust her judgment and eliminate her from this mission. That she could not abide. If there were indeed werewolves still living, she could not leave their deaths to the hands of others. She had to know they were well and truly gone this time. Please, talk with me, Lorinar continued stubbornly. I know that you don't know me very well, but I have learned in my life the therapeutic nature of speaking one's demons to another. Not only have I helped others by listening, but others have helped me. You see, I too do what I do because of what I have suffered. Mirette turned back to face her interrogator and was shocked by what she saw. Tears formed in Lorinar's eyes. She looked so deeply sad. Mirette wondered what this magi had suffered, and realized suddenly that she had only thought of her own troubles, that she had not taken time to wonder if others had suffered as she had. It had been so long since she had anyone that she could relate to. You see, when I was young I lived in a small forest village with my family. My father was a scholar, my mother a craftswoman. She wove beautiful tapestries that some would travel miles to see. They loved the seclusion of their wooded home, and the quiet peace that it offered. That was, until the Great War began to rage, and suddenly the world was not so safe anymore. I remember the day so well. It was a beautiful day, not a cloud in the sky it seemed. Not the sort of day you would imagine to be so sad. We heard the watchmen sound their bells of alarm as Daesh emerged from the woods. They set fire to homes, slaying men, women, and children as they went. My mother hid me in an alcove beneath our floor. I was so helpless. I could do nothing as I heard the creatures enter my home and kill my parents. I waited in that alcove for what seemed like days, terrified to leave. It wasn't until scouts from Gondwan came to investigate that I found the courage to come out. I later learned that the Daesh had left many alive but terribly injured, letting them die from loss of blood and infection to increase their suffering. I swore to myself that I would do everything in my power to make sure that people did not suffer as the people of my village did. Learning the art of healing, both mundane and magical, came naturally to me. So it is this that drives me now. As Lorinar finished her story, Mireth felt her heart ache for her. Mireth studied the vulnerable and hurt magi that stood before her. She felt tears running down her own face as she wondered if maybe this one time she could trust someone with her story. What did she have to lose? Certainly, she could not feel worse than she did already. You remind me, Mireth began, her lips trembling. You remind me of my baby sister. I miss her. Things were easier when I could speak with her. She was the one person in my life that I knew I could trust. The world had shown me just how dark things could get. Life had shown me that the people you love the most can turn on you, but still she remained by my side. Mireth tried to continue speaking, but her breath was cut short by sobs as she remembered her loving sister. Lorinar placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and waited patiently as Mireth took a few breaths and regained her composure. She's gone now. She was one of the final casualties in our private war. I was a young girl when it happened, only 12 in fact. My sister Maribel and I would often go on fantasy adventures together while our father and mother worked. On one such day, we were in our pretend world without a single care when we heard a cry of anguish coming from our home. By the time we reached the doorway, it was too late. My father lay dead on the ground, mutilated by a werewolf. I see it as vividly now as I did then. The beast stood over his dead body and looked up at us with feral eyes. For whatever reason, she ran out the door and past us. I wonder to this day if there was still a part of her in control. She? Lorinar asked, concern showing in her eyes as they widened. Yes, she. You see, this werewolf was no stranger. When I saw the creature, I saw scraps of clothing still hanging from its form. Since then, I faced her again and confirmed it for certain. That werewolf was my mother. They both remained silent for a moment. I am so sorry, Lorinar said finally. No wonder you have found no sleep lately. You must certainly fear what lies ahead of us may be those foul creatures. Mireth turned from Lorinar for a moment, closing her eyes. She pondered her own words as well as the deepest of her emotions. Suddenly, like the first light of dawn breaking forth, it occurred to her what was truly bothering her in her innermost being. The thing is, she began, for a long time I lived for nothing but vengeance. My sister and I both. We trained ourselves and honed ourselves into weapons, into hunters. We made it our ambition to see all of the werewolves slain, even our own mother. As far as I know, we had succeeded. We spent years slaying the beasts until finally we cornered my mother and the alpha male. My sister was mortally wounded in that fight, but together we killed them both. It wasn't until after this that the fear began to haunt me every waking and sleeping hour. I have wandered without purpose and without companionship for years now, the nightmares and flashbacks growing worse the more time I have to think of them. I traveled from place to place, selling my service to slay beasts first, and then anything they would pay me good coin to kill, though it never was about the money. She paused for a moment, considering the best way she could say what she had come to understand. The thing is, now, the closer we get to discovering the possibility that werewolves remain, It is not that I fear facing them once again. What frightens me most, what keeps me from my sleep, is that I have a growing sense within me that with their return, I again have purpose. The thing that keeps me awake at night is the growing sense that I wanted them back. As Adamir sat down on a log they had placed near their fire, he saw Lornar head into the woods. Seeing that the stew Nolendil was preparing was beginning to boil, he realized that Lornar was likely summoning Mireth back to dinner. His stomach grumbled in anticipation. Even on horseback, traveling built up quite the appetite, and Adamir was more than ready to devour some hot food. As he waited patiently for the women to return to camp, their wizard companion Elysian took a seat next to him. The wizard did not for a moment look up from the scroll that he was reading, likely trying to get as much of it in as he could in the dying light. As he watched Elysian read, his curiosity began to get the better of him. Few true wizards remained these days, and Adamir had never spent any amount of time with one. He was intrigued by anything he didn't understand, and magic certainly fell into that category. It seemed to break all the rules, perhaps even inventing new ones. Adamir was dying to pick the wizard's brain about it. "Sir, how does magic work?" Adamir asked, no longer able to restrain himself. He felt a pang of guilt as annoyance registered on the wizard's face. Elysian sighed, rolling the scroll he was reading up, before tying a piece of twine around it and placing it somewhere in the folds of his robe. "That, my friend, is a difficult question. Perhaps you could be more specific?" "Well, here's the thing. I was thinking about the spell that you cast that will allow Peleus to find Rakan when he needs to." "Well, how does one develop such a specific spell? Is imagination the only limit to what magic can do? If so, what's to stop us from simply teleporting right into Malsheth or straight into Barnell? It would certainly save us a great deal of traveling time. Plus, it would give us the element of surprise." Elysian stroked his chin, as was his custom. "Let me explain something that may clear up a lot of your questions. You see, the source of our magic is our goddess Thessa, who, when she created the Magi, embedded us some of her creative potential. This means that within every member of our race is the potential for magic, and yes, we can do with it whatever we can imagine. There are, however, limitations. Wizards discovered long ago that magic requires energy, and that energy comes from within ourselves. Like the muscles of our body, using magic builds up your ability to cast spells. Also, like the muscles of our body, the use of magic is a strain on us, and we will eventually hit a wall," he explained, a grin of satisfaction spreading across his face. This did not satisfy Adamir's curiosity. "Why, then, are there so few magi wizards if we all can be? For that matter, why am I not a wizard? I was tested in my youth to see if I had the potential, but I did not. Neither do Nolendil or Lornar or any other magi that I have encountered in my life, save you." From the corner of his eye, Adamir could see Nolendil rolling his eyes at the endless questions. That is a mystery that befuddles even the greatest of our scholars. It seems that with passing generations, magic has begun to fade from our blood. For whatever reason, fewer and fewer were born with the ability, so that even with our race being immortal as we are, after the ravages of war, few remain who are capable. I only know of myself and the twin wizards Ardeka and Antema. Yet still, even those who are not true wizards can recite certain spells that have been passed down from generation to generation, like your companion Lornar and her healing spells and protective wards. Adamir pondered the ramifications for a moment and considered what other questions he might have for the wizard. There were so many that came to mind, but he wanted not just to understand magic, but this wielder of magic who sat beside him. He pondered a question that would help him see into Elysian's personality. "So then, if magic is limited, there must be things you wish you could do but cannot. Tell me, friend, if you had the limits taken from you, and you could cast any spell you could imagine, what would you do with that power?" Elysian pondered for a moment, taken aback temporarily by the question. "My father left me when I was just a child to fight the war. I've always hated conflict for that reason. Every war always seems to have a justifiable cause, and every peace is claimed to be the final peace. Still, in the long years of my life, I have seen that every war is the same, and that peace never lasts for long. I suppose if I had limitless power, I would bring an end to all war." "What a cliché answer," Adamir teased. "Well, what would you do if you could use magic and were given limitless power?" "Simple," Adamir said with a grin. "I would cast a spell that gave me perfect knowledge of the whole world." "Ha!" Nolendil laughed, causing both Adamir and Elysian to look towards him. Perhaps then the world would have peace just from your endless questioning." At this, both the other magi joined him in laughter as the two women rejoined the men. Adamir could see from their eyes that they had been crying. He would have to ask them about that later. The familiar scent of death and decay met Mireth's nose as she ran her finger across the claw marks that marred the door frame. She drew her hand back suddenly as a splinter pierced her skin. It all felt so surreal. The stacks of books and papers spread all around the scholar's old home, the dark blood stains on the wooden floor. Mireth looked back at Lorinar and nodded. There was no doubt in her mind now that werewolves were behind this death. It was strange and disconcerting how calm she felt. Her breathing was steady, her mind clear. Since confiding in Lorinar, Mireth had finally slept. Though nightmares continued to plague her sleeping hours, it was better than no sleep at all. As they traveled 3 more days, she became more and more alert and rested. She was ready. She knew now what she had to do. Elysian pored through all of the paperwork that lay before him on the desk, as Adamir, Lorinar, and Nolendil waited patiently outside the door. The mayor of Barnell stood nearby, his arms crossed and looking bored. He was quite a short man, hardly standing over 4 feet tall. In contrast, his fine suit and bright blue sash made him stand out, as if trying to make up for his underwhelming stature. "Are you all just going to stand there?" Elysian asked, frustration showing on his face. They all filed in obediently and began poring over the scattered notes in the small, crowded domicile. Mireth stood in the corner, pretending to read what she hoped was an unimportant scrap of paper, embarrassment growing within her. Perhaps somewhere along the way she should have taken the time to learn to read. They continued their search for a while, lighting candles as the sun began to set. Mireth continued to do as little as possible, hoping to avoid unnecessary attention to her inability to read. As they searched, Mireth suddenly noticed that they were a head short. Adamir was nowhere to be seen. She walked to the doorway and looked out, but he was not there. "What is it?" Lorinar asked her. "Adamir, where did he go?" Lorinar sighed. "That's Adamir. The fool cannot stay still. I cannot tell you how many times—" She was interrupted by a howl coming from the east that made Mireth's heart sink in her chest. She looked at the ground and saw tracks headed in the same direction, from both a werewolf and what she presumed to be their missing magi comrade. "How could I not have noticed these tracks before?" She cursed herself for her own foolishness. "Why wouldn't the fool tell us he found tracks? Why would he follow them alone? What depths of idiocy!" She cursed him for his foolishness. "Quickly," Mireth cried. "We must go to his aid." She did not wait for an answer. Adrenaline rushed through her as she began sprinting towards the source of the howl. Her hands rushed instinctively, and before she knew it, her bow was drawn and an arrow nocked and ready. 60 feet from the ruined home was the edge of the forest. She quickly entered this forest, her eyes peeled for an enemy to slay. She remembered all the times before, all the strategies she had for killing the foul beasts. Strike first, strike fast. That was always the key to taking them out. They were fast and they were deadly. She knew that if they hit you, you were more than likely to be infected by their disease. There was no other way to ensure your safety than to take them out before they could strike you even once. It was not long before she saw in the dying light of the day a werewolf standing 9 feet tall over the fallen form of her traveling companion Adamir. On either side were 2 more of the hulking beasts. She worried that she had arrived too late, but she had no time to think about that. She had only time to act. Mireth bellowed a war cry as she drew back her bow and fired at the centermost werewolf. The beast looked up just in time for the arrow to penetrate its skull just between its eyes. In this one motion, she had killed 1 werewolf and stole the attention of the other 2. They snarled and ran towards her on all 4s. Mireth came to a halt and planted her feet. She needed to take these creatures out before they reached her where she stood, but this was no easy task at their speed. She drew another arrow back, took a deep breath in, and aimed carefully at the werewolf coming quickly towards her from the right. She cursed as her arrow flew through the air, just missing the creature's head. She drew another arrow and fired, pressure mounting as both creatures grew closer to her. This time her arrow met its mark and the creature fell with her arrow in its head. She was now out of time, with the final werewolf bearing down on her. She leapt quickly back, just in time to avoid the beast's claws. Mireth dropped her bow and reached desperately for her sword as the creature began to attack again. Hope fled her heart as she realized that she wouldn't be able to draw her blade fast enough. Her muscles tensed as she prepared herself to feel the claws digging into her flesh. "Tessa!" she heard, just as the creature was about to strike her. A flash of light materialized just in front of her, blinding her for a moment and causing the werewolf to howl in pain. The beast was then thrown violently back, colliding with a nearby tree with a resounding crack. Bark and bits of wood flew back as the tree began to fall with a crash on the ground. Mireth twisted around and saw Elysian standing tall with his staff in hand, the end of which was glowing with unnatural light. Mireth felt hot shame at being saved by this wizard a second time. Still, one couldn't help but be helpful when death is averted. Lornar rushed past him to get to Adamir's side to inspect his wounds. Nolendil ran to where the werewolf lay, stunned next to the fallen tree. He lifted the creature's head and put his blade to its throat. Elysian joined Nolendil and placed his glowing staff on the werewolf's forehead. "Join us," Elysian whispered, and Mireth marveled as the creature's features twisted and changed until she saw before her the head of a man on the body of a werewolf. His eyes opened and he sneered at his captives. Mireth approached cautiously, sword in hand. "Werewolves are by rule senseless creatures. Your attack on the scholar in Barnell was planned. Explain yourself. Who has gained control of the werewolves and for what purpose?" Elysian asked the creature. It simply stared at him with cold hatred in response. "If you do not answer me of your own will, I will cast magic to force you into sharing the truth, a process that will not be without pain for you." "Gah! We serve Malsheth," the beast said in a strange, growling, halting voice. "He wanted enchantment. We kill. Take note. Location of enchantment." "Where is the note now? Do you have it?" "Ha! Sent fastest to pack back to Alpha. Stay here. Kill any who dare follow." "Where is your Alpha? Where does your pack live?" "In deep forest. In Alumbra." Wrath shook her head in disbelief. Not only were there still werewolves, but the creatures still lived in the same forest she had searched endlessly to slay them all. How did any survive? She had been so thorough. Anger built within her, and she stepped forward, channeling all her rage as she buried her sword into the beast's chest. It yelped before staring into her eyes as its breath stopped. Mireth feared the sense of satisfaction that she felt as she killed the disgusting creature. "Why did you do that?" Nolendil cried accusingly. "We had all the information that we needed. These creatures are endless machines of rage and death. Would you rather I had let it live to snap and bite at each of us?" she yelled back at him, the volume of her voice rising as she spoke. "We had better count ourselves fortunate," she continued, her voice calming, "that your idiot friend Adamir is a magi. As far as I can tell, your race cannot be infected." She thought of her father. It was likely this reason that he had been slain. "We know all we need to know. We have our bearing. Let us rest tonight and get on the road at earliest light. We have werewolves to hunt." Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below if you had unlimited magic powers. What spell would you cast? Until next time.